And now I'd like to welcome on stage Justice for Women, Sharon Binks.
Thank you. All new to me, this. I'd just like to start by thanking Gerard Batten for attending our event last week. I know he's had a lot of stick from fake news. But anyway, I'm Sharon Binks. I'm one of the organisers for a women's movement raising awareness against rape, sexual assault and grooming. Justice for the Women and Children was started by Natasha Allen, a very concerned young mother from Sunderland. Unfortunately, Tasha couldn't be here today. We already had a commitment to speak at the demo in Newcastle organised by the North East Angels, one of the many groups of volunteers, many with personal experience of rape, grooming and child sexual assault, dedicating their time to protect our children. They follow up on reports of assaults on young people in the community. They patrol our streets and catch paedophiles grooming our children on the internet. Following reports of 4 rapes in the space of 10 days, Tasha set up a page on Facebook. Tasha wanted to know what the police and council were doing to protect the women being raped in Mowbray Park, the women being spiked and raped on a night out, and the threats of children being snatched off the street on their way to and from school. Some of the locals have renamed Rape Avenue. Tasha had a good response on her page, so she organised a protest march in June this year. The first march I ever attended was in Sunderland, in the June the previous year. Justice for Chelsea. Chelsea had been gang raped and beaten by 3 men after a night out. She went straight to the police station with the evidence still on her body. The CPS were not willing to prosecute. I had my eyes opened that day. I learned from Peter Sweden that Sweden had become the rape capital of Europe. I learned from Tommy Robinson the extent of the grooming gangs and rape jihad that had been covered up for many years by the establishment. I realised I'd been living in a bubble. How could the mainstream media not be all over this? There was a complete media blackout. How do we stay safe if we don't know the risks? I was frightened for my own daughter's safety. So many women aren't aware of the dangers. I heard from people at the demo that people were losing their jobs for attending protests. I didn't think supporting a rape victim would be seen as a political protest. I worked for North Yorkshire County Council at the time. I'd worked there for 15 years. I supported hundreds of children and families in their own homes and within the education system. I was well versed on the impacts of child abuse, attachment disorder, learning difficulties, mental health and family breakdown. I had to tackle some difficult issues as a family support worker, but honesty and empathy got me through and earned me the respect of the parents. I never had a complaint made against me in 15 years. However, after speaking about what I'd learned at the demos to colleagues and sharing some posts on Facebook, I was considered far right and racist and suspended from work, cut off from my whole life. They even held a ladder on me. That's a multi-agency meeting where they consider if you are a risk to children. The police came to my house to let me know they hadn't found anything on my Facebook that was any more than a little unsavoury, but rape often is. I was no longer considered trustworthy to work with the families I'd dared to speak out about the Muslim grooming gangs, terrorist attacks and the danger I felt the illegal immigrants posed. During the investigation, I stood by everything I had said about my concern for our children. It was based on fact, my concerns as a parent and a grandparent. I maintained that it was about rape and paedophilia, not race and religion. Unfortunately, the truth has no place in this world of political correctness and cover-ups. I was sacked for religious discrimination in December in case I upset a Muslim with my views. I'd shared my views on paedophile priests in the Catholic Church many times and nobody raised an eyebrow, let alone sack me in case I upset a Catholic. I can't get a job as they keep putting dismissed for gross misconduct on my reference. In January, I went back on Facebook and saw there was a Veterans March in Newcastle, so I went along. I've been to a number of marches since then. And I've met so many wonderful, caring people who've been very supportive, not the far-right thugs they are portrayed in the media. While at the Free Tommy demo in London, I met a group from Sunderland. Keith recognised me from Facebook. I'd been unlawfully arrested and assaulted in Manchester a few weeks earlier. I'd been attending a remembrance march for those killed in the Manchester bombing. Keith told me about Justice for Women and Children of Sunderland and invited me to attend their first demo. I was asked to read out letters sent to Tasha from women about their abuse and rape, and from there became one of the organisers. We've had meetings with the police and the council to highlight the dangers in the community and promote safer streets. We held a community meeting to discuss local people's concerns and the areas of greatest risk. We share information and stories on our page of convicted sex offenders and any incidents in the city people need to be aware of. We read out stories victims have shared with us and give survivors a platform to speak out if they're feeling brave enough. The aim of our demos is to raise awareness and to encourage victims to come forward. We decided to play music on our march to avoid people shouting out and chanting. The first 2 demos in Sunderland were peaceful. There were no counter-protests. We didn't really expect any, considering we were protesting against rape and abuse. We decided to take our demo to Middlesbrough. I'd heard a lot about child prostitution over the 30 years in the area, but nothing about grooming gangs. We liaised with the police and the council to agree a route and were told where to hold the speeches. We were told by the police there would not be a counter-protest. We were told there'd been a couple of inquiries and there may be a couple of people handing out leaflets in the town, but not a protest. We had a number of victims speaking for us that day. When we arrived, there was a counter-demo waiting for us, shouting out and calling us racist. The police did nothing to move them on, even though they had not sought agreement to protest, and they were upsetting the children with us. The headline that day was about the clash between protesters and not the issue of rape and abuse. You have to wonder who is racist when they assume we were only talking about Muslims when we speak about rapists and paedophiles. They didn't want to hear what was being said, even though most of our stories refer to white males. The counter-protests are organised by the far left, MPs, union members, Muslims. They call themselves Stand Up to Racism. They actually don't stand up for anything. Their sole aim is to counter-protest, to shut us down, to brand anyone standing up against the tyranny in this country a racist. Shouting abuse at the women and children trying to stand up against rape, sexual abuse and grooming, telling people we have a hidden far-right agenda. We have to accept this opposition as part of the fight. However, we will not be deterred from fighting for our children. I acknowledged in my speech in Middlesbrough the decent, hard-working Muslims who hate what is happening within their community through the radicalisation of Islam and the increase in jihad. I acknowledge that they can't speak out against the rape and grooming even if they wanted to, especially while there is Sharia law in this country. A Muslim man thanked me for what I said in his defence. He hated that some of the men in his community were raping young girls. A Muslim woman came forward who said she had been raped by her husband and wished women in her community could speak out. We want victims of abuse in the Muslim community to come forward, but how do we protect them from persecution? We also had 4 young girls come up to us in tears with their stories of rape and abuse. They told us they'd been to the police but felt let down. We've had stories of grooming gangs from the 80s, institutional abuse, family abuse, rape and spiking of drinks. We hope to visit every town in the North East to raise awareness. We'd like to encourage women up and down the country to start groups of their own, to fight back, to stand up for themselves and their children. We want honest, open discussions about rape and child sexual abuse. Children will be better protected if society is prepared to discuss the issues openly and frankly. Institutions with a responsibility to keep children safe from sexual abuse must play a key role. We want to educate our children about grooming, about the dangers of the internet, about the dangers of working in certain takeaways where assaults have been reported. We want an end to the sexualisation of our children by the media, education system and the LGBT movement. We will never accept paedophilia as a normal sexual orientation. Thank you. We have an age of consent for a reason. We know that the rape of children is damaging. We believe there are 3 gender possibilities and it's wrong to confuse our children and bring sex into the classroom, especially at primary level. We want an end to blaming the victims for what happens to them with the use of language such as child prostitution, risky behaviour, promiscuity. This is damaging for the victims and survivors who feel to blame for the abuse rather than being a victim of serious criminal offence. It is rape, we must call it rape. Phrases such as attention seeker or fantasist have an impact on the perception and credibility of adult survivors, especially without the access to their records. We want to encourage survivors to come forward, to share their stories, to not feel ashamed or blamed. We want to see a change in the way victims are treated when they report a sexual assault. We hear stories of victims being questioned over and over again, just to have it thrown out. There needs to be a culture change within the police service in relation to child sexual abuse. We don't want to see another Rochdale, Telford, Newcastle, the list goes on. We want to see justice for the victims of institutional abuse. We want the police, the politicians, the social workers and health workers held accountable for the abuse and their failure to protect. We want to see easier access to records for those who have been through the care system. They have a right to make sense of their lives. Why should they be fobbed off and have to request access time and time again? We want to see survivors have their complaints against the police, if they think their case was handled badly, to be taken seriously, regardless of how much time has lapsed. We want to see survivors get compensation for the crimes against them, regardless of whether they have turned to drugs or crime since the offence against them was committed. We want tighter checks on taxi drivers and takeaways. We get a lot of reports about Muslim taxi drivers assaulting young girls, particularly in the Middlesbrough area. There are a growing number of reports from girls who have been sexually, verbally and physically assaulted whilst working in kebab and pizza shops, predominantly by Muslim males. The laws against abuse in this country are being ignored for certain communities with cultural difference. Yet the average British family are jumped on if they smack their child. Imagine if I mutilated my daughter's genitals, would I not be prosecuted? We want the corrupt common purpose politicians and civil servants out. No more cover-ups. We want the rapists and paedophiles off the street or monitored closely, not just moved around and protected. We want adequate laws to protect all women and children, not the perpetrators. We want our children and our grandchildren to be safe now and in the future. Thank you for listening.